What happens when Stranger Things takes years to film? One of their actors ends up in a really poor horror movie. The Deliverance has just landed on Netflix, and this latest horror film is focused around the Jackson family. Zebon Sandre has a demon within him that is controlling him and his siblings, and it wants to kill the whole family, with a dark history connected to the house. This film is actually based on a true story that happened to the Latoya Adams. I was intrigued, so without further ado, let's not wait any longer and jump into the video to break down all there is to take away from the movie. Here is a review of The Deliverance and the ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The Deliverance review. So, is the movie worth watching? When it comes to looking at what makes a good horror movie, I think there are a couple of main things that you want. On the surface level, you want a compelling story that actually has some kind of substance to it. You want to feel the environment and feel a little bit scared, if not for yourself, then at least for the characters. And you don't want it to be cheesy. This one didn't hit the mark on any of those things. I found the story just didn't quite make sense to me when watching it. We obviously had this demon that was calling itself Trey, and Ben Ice described the demon as one of the fallen angels. But we never truly understood the connection with the house and why it was that this demon wanted to destroy anybody that set foot in there and inhabited it. It was also confusing trying to wrap your head around if it was actually Trey, the boy that died there, or if it was the demon. So, the whole reasoning behind why the demon was so interested in killing the family didn't make sense to me at all. Ben Ice mentioned that it was because Ebony was weak at that moment, but come on, what does that even mean? It kind of just felt like this was a story about Ebony finding religion, and they used a demon haunting her family as a way of her believing in Jesus and God at the end, because that belief was what ultimately sent it back to hell. One thing that I thought while watching it was that it never truly felt like the stakes were actually that high. In good horror movies, the pacing is done right, and it builds to a crescendo where things normally go wrong for a bit, and then the demon is defeated. This movie did try to follow that structure, but I felt like there was almost too much teasing shown to us with Trey, Nate, and Shani in the early parts of the movie. By the end, it just didn't really have the impact that it wanted or needed to have. I find horror works best when it's left to your imagination, but this one was just showing us everything. I did actually laugh to myself a little bit in the final third because it just got ridiculous. When Ben Ice was being dragged around, I rolled my eyes. When the demon was just transforming between Alberta, Trey, and then Ebony, I just found it more amusing and humorous rather than frightening. When Trey broke out of the restraint and crawled up the wall, it just reminded me of Spider-Man. Then when Ebony started speaking in tongues, that was the final straw for me. When she mentioned how she was a child of God and that it was actually defeating the demon, I just thought it was lazy writing. I understand that she found faith in that moment, but I feel like there should have been more than that, as it was just too fresh right at the end. When Cynthia even said to Ebony that she wished she had her faith, something she'd only had for a few days, it made me cringe a bit. It all just felt a little bit cliche and like the ideal happy ending. Even though this movie was almost 2 hours long, a place where I feel it went massively wrong is with the fact that we had all of these characters, but I don't feel like we really learned anything about them. Alberta was probably one of the more interesting characters, and I thought Glenn actually performed her role well. But other than waving a bat around and trying to get her daughter to find religion, she didn't amount to much at all. Ebony had a dark past with the fact that she was abused when she was younger, and that was what led her away from religion because she asked God to make it stop, and it didn't. So I thought that was an interesting angle to come at it from, but I just didn't feel the need to have this whole dynamic of the father of the kids not being in the picture and her being an alcoholic included. I just don't really know what it added to the character. Maybe it just showed the judgment that the DCs had. With regards to the effects in the movie, I don't think they were the best. They just served their purpose. The creepiest version of the demon was when it took on the form of Alberta. I thought that was actually quite haunting to look at. But when Shani was just floating in the air above the bed, it felt a bit cliche. And when Ebony was having all sorts of bones cracked and things like that, it just felt like we'd seen it all before. The strangest one was when Nate started eating his flesh and scratching his arms and chest. I didn't quite understand what the point of it was, but at least it felt like there was some kind of originality to it. In terms of overall performances, I thought they were all okay, to be honest. I don't think there was a weak link. There were parts where I was less convinced than others, but no poor performances really distracted from the story, so that's one positive, I suppose. I feel like this movie was just a book of cliché horror tropes with no real originality to it whatsoever. The movie was actually more interesting in the first third, just watching the family dynamic and how their life was playing out and how they interacted with one another. I'd like to say that this is a movie of moments, but it doesn't even really have that. However, it does have one moment. There's one moment of really poor acting that sticks in my mind, and that was when Ebony was in the car. She saw Dre's eyes while he was possessed, and then screamed. It just didn't look convincing or real at all. It's a shame because I felt like we could use a good horror movie, especially off the back of Longlegs, The Watcher, and also Trap. I genuinely think the last good original horror movie was probably Talk to Me, which was late last year, so I guess we got to keep on waiting. The Deliverance ending explained. So, in terms of the ending of this movie, we saw that Ebony came to the realization that she needed to work with the apostle Ben-Ice James in order to save her son, rather than leaving him in the hands of the hospital. So, she broke Dre out and then took him to have a deliverance done. During the deliverance, the demon was morphing between different people that Ebony cared about so that it would put her off going through with sending it back to hell. Ben-Ice ultimately ended up dying because she had doubts in her mind over if she could actually destroy the demon. The same thing that happened several years ago with the previous people that lived in the house, the parents of Trey. That was why Trey ended up being killed, because Ben-Ice failed. That's also why Ben-Ice said to Ebony that she shouldn't fear the demon because fear was the weakness. Ebony ultimately ended up dying at one point, and it was when it cut to black that we heard her mother say, "You can talk to God." From there, that was where she then found her faith and was brought back to life, just like what the pastor said in the opening part of the movie with what happened to Lazarus. From there, Ebony had found her faith after speaking with God, and that faith was the very thing that sent the demon back down to hell. After obviously speaking in tongues, Ebony was seen as weak by the demon, hence why it was able to infiltrate the family. But once she had her faith and belief, she was able to use that as strength and power to fight back. Once the demon was sent back, we saw that the 3 children were all healed of the injuries they had and couldn't remember anything that happened. Cynthia, the social worker, had also changed her mind and was on the side of Ebony after what she saw when she was in the hospital, and they were going to work together to try and reunite the family as they were still being kept in care for their safety. Right at the end, the family was back together and driving off in the car back to Philly, and Ebony was going to give it another go with the kid's father. So, there was a somewhat happy ending, but I suppose not for the next family that inhabits that house. I would say don't waste your time with this movie. It hasn't really got anything special about it. It's not that frightening, and the story is just very weak. It's a shame. It's not even one of those rubbish horror movies that's like a guilty pleasure, and you don't mind throwing on because this one actually tried to be good. So, save yourself 2 hours. Outro. So there you have it, a review of The Deliverance and the ending explained. If you want to see more videos on your favorite TV series and movies broken down, then click on the card in the top corner. Alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. Finally, if you'd like to see what I gave this movie out of 5 stars, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of The Deliverance? Let me know if you thought it was just as bad in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.